people see of Calcutta is so much conditioned by a certain sort of geographical environment, you know. I mean, to most of us, when we think about what Calcutta is, uh, our first thought about it is that it's a Bengali city. But you know, Calcutta is not and never has been a primarily Bengali city. I mean, and the reason why this illusion exists is largely because of the ways in which the geography of Calcutta is configured. So, say for most of us who live in, you know, let's say you live in Salt Lake, but I live in South Calcutta and so on. The geography of Calcutta that we inhabit is this geography which is connected to, as it were, a sort of middle class, bureaucratic, educational Calcutta. But what we forget is that Calcutta was also this very important military center, and it was really, it's a city built upon the economy of opium. You know, all of that is now completely erased, you know, within the history, within our vision of what this city is. And the opium, of course, I've written about at great length, you know, in my book. But I think one very important aspect of it that we should never forget is really Calcutta as the mailed fist. Because this is what Calcutta was, not just for India, but really for Asia. You know, it was from Calcutta that the British launched their most important military campaigns. It was from Calcutta that they conquered Burma, that they defeated the Chinese, that actually they fought wars in Indonesia, what is now Indonesia, in Malaysia, and so on. And all of this really happened. All the planning really happened out of this city. And yet it is completely veiled from our consciousness of Calcutta, you know. So even I, writing, say, The Circle of Reason, what interested me about Calcutta was, as it were, this intellectual adventure. But in many ways, you know, really the great success of the British Empire, and even beyond that, I would say the Anglo-American Empire, has been its ability to cloak, you know, the military dimensions of its power behind this whole sort of edifice of, if you like, education and, you know, departments of English and so on, so that so that it becomes so easy to think of imperialism as being something to do with ideas and so on. Whereas really, the empire was the mailed fist, you know, and that mailed fist really hangs over this city in such an important way. I mean, even when we look at Fort William, for example, we always forget that the surrounding areas, this Maidan, is over there to provide a field of fire, you know, in case the city ever rose up, you know, against it. That's the reason why the Maidan exists, not for any sort of ecological purpose, you know. Similarly, you know, all the military settlements, everything that was military about Calcutta really is on that side of Chorungi. You know, and most of all concentrated in Khidirpur, which was the great center of, say, for, let's say, for trade, for the whole sort of marine aspect of Calcutta. And then there was the other part of it, which was really one whole area of the Maidan, for example, was called the Laskar camp. You know, because that was where these great sort of military settlements were. And those areas of the city were not at all Bengali. They were really largely Bihari, from UP and so on. And, you know, for a long time, within the population of the city, uh, those were the those were the most important parts. Even today, I find those parts of the city so interesting, really, because if you go to, for example, so few people ever visit one of the most beautiful monuments in Calcutta, which is the Bhukoilash Rajbari, you know. It's such a beautiful monument. And if you go there, you would imagine yourself to be in Bihar. You know, the language you hear is Bhojpuri. You know, you're surrounded by the culture of Bihar, really. And, you know, being where we are, we tend to forget that, you know, Calcutta was really mainly drugs and thugs, as they call them. Because, you know, that was really the part of the city that kept this city alive. You know, that was where the economic vitality as well as, you know, the strategic importance of the city lay.
Well, two things occur to me listening to you about this. One is that extraordinary passage at the start of Conrad's Heart of Darkness, where Marlowe is saying, and this too has been one of the dark places of the earth. And he's talking about what went out from the Thames, um, uh, the imperial mission, because you started by talking about imperialism being not just an idea of empire, but the practicalities, the money, the political and the military power of empire, how it is exerted. And that too, I mean, in a sense, Conrad at the start of Heart of Darkness is trying to unveil that exercise or that operation of power from the heart of London. I was thinking that, in a sense, your three novels, these three that you mentioned, the Ibis trilogy, have been, in a sense, looking at this expanse of the Ganges, the Hooghly near Calcutta, as carrying this flow of goods and men and commodities uh, on this, on in service of empire, not with the British Empire in India. The other point that I'd like to quickly make here is that, do you see a contrast with Bombay? Because Bombay too is a very important city in this trilogy, particularly. In the first one, the second, certainly, The River of Smoke, very much so. Bombay, I visited Bombay very recently, and it seems to be a city very aware of its naval character. You know, the navy is everywhere. There's one part of Bombay where you can never forget the navy's presence. Calcutta, as you say, conceals its other aspect very well. So, would you like to say a little more about that?
Yes, absolutely. I think Bombay and Calcutta, between them, have really formed modern India, And the crucial difference between Bombay and Calcutta is that the Bengal presidency was really it was completely within British control at the time when they started implementing their opium policy. So what happened is that at that point, really from Calcutta, they controlled as far as, almost to the borders of Awadh. So Bihar was completely within the Bengal presidency. So they decided to start expanding opium production within the Bengal presidency and as a monopoly of the British government. Similarly, at that point in time, the late 18th century, Bombay was actually a completely isolated city. It was surrounded by very powerful Indian states, basically the Maratha Confederacy and so on. And the Maratha Confederacy wasn't actually defeated until 1806, the Battle of Assaye, which was actually the single most important battle that the British fought in India. It was fought, of course, by the Duke of Wellington, and he almost lost. And until the end of his days, he thought that was a more important victory than Waterloo. You know, so this is the huge difference, that at the time when the British were building the opium economy of India, they could not impose a monopoly in the Bombay presidency. They tried very hard, but they couldn't, because local merchants constantly outwitted them. And in order to defeat these local merchants, they tried every possibility. That was basically the thinking behind the invasion of Sindh, for example. But what happened, because they never succeeded in this crucial period in imposing an opium monopoly in Bombay, what happened is that in Bombay, commerce and trade grew up under circumstances of local initiative. I think this is the crucial difference that we see between the Bengal presidency and the Bombay presidency. The Bombay presidency was an area where a private initiative thrived, where a lot of people, a lot of local traders benefited from the opium trade. In Calcutta, that never happened. Essentially, the profits always stayed in British hands. And I think that profoundly marked, if you like, the whole Bengali ideology. Because the whole ideology of Bengal became one of deep suspicion of industry in general. You know, to me, going back and forth between, I mean, I now live mainly on the west coast of India. It really strikes me as so powerfully, the sort of suspicion of of economy, if you like, that exists in Bengal and which ultimately led to 35 years of CPM rule. It's such a marked contrast with the ideology of Western India, and ultimately it goes back to this very chance thing, that they managed to seize all of Bengal by the late 18th century, and they did not really manage to seize the Bombay presidency until quite late in the early 19th century.
Actually, yes, that's absolutely true. But I always, I also remember how many of these African campaigns of the British, the campaign in Eritrea, set sail from Bombay. Napier taking men, elephants, cannon, setting sail in his ships from the port of Bombay. This is the mid 19th
Hmm.
century, of course. It's well after the Bombay
Yeah.
presidency has been annexed, as it were. But I'd like perhaps to hear a little bit more about the last novel, The Flood of Fire, because River of Smoke. I think of the three. One must be allowed to have a favorite or a preference. The second one, River of Smoke, is my favorite. But I think that I will not ask you so much about this wonderful account that you have there of what is it, flowers and opium and flowers, or
Yes, yes.
yes, or something. But about Flood of Fire, because it's a very complex novel and there's a huge battle scene in it. So, what kind of research did you do for that novel, and what do you think it does by way of ending or not ending the trilogy?
Well, I did do a lot of research. It was a huge, it was a incredibly challenging book to write, but also in its own way very, very rewarding, I think. A lot of it came to me as a surprise, because a lot has been written about the Opium War, and it should be. I mean, the Opium War is really the formative moment in the formation of modern Asia, and so little attention is paid to it, really. And it was a war launched from Calcutta, it was fought by Indians, it was financed by Indians. And considering all that, so little attention is paid to it in India, really, which is a truly shocking thing.
Yeah. I have another question because I've just very recently been peer reviewing an article on the Ibis trilogy, and this article deals with what is posed in economics as the Adam Smith problem. Because your novels, of course, these novels particularly contain many references to free trade and the arguments for and against free trade, and these are debated by the merchants in China, just around the time of the war. I'd like to ask you, what is your opinion about this Adam Smith problem, which, put very briefly, is that on the one hand, Adam Smith is for free trade. On the other hand, in the theory of moral sentiments, he appears to be espousing some kind of, or giving some kind of validity to moral action for its own sake. That is to say, altruistic actions, charity, generosity, goodwill towards others, rather than simply the pursuit of self-interest. Whereas, free trade seems to put self-interest above everything else. So, do you think that your novels offer a kind of exposition of this Adam Smith problem?
That's a very complicated way of putting it. Um, you know, many of the characters in my book are, of course, great votaries of free trade, and they came to free trade really out of. And today, it's so extraordinary to hear President Xi Jinping, talking in Davos, becoming this great advocate of free trade, because, of course, the first place that free trade destroyed was China. So it's an extraordinary thing. I mean, you see such a sort of turning of the wheel. But of course, what China practices is not free trade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what China practices, what really India practiced for a long time, was our old forms of trade, which
Yes.
predate free trade. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they were the Chinese were producing for the world market a very long time ago. Indians were producing for the world market a very long time ago. So all these forms of trade have always existed,
Exactly.
and people have always participated in them. There's
Right.
nothing new about it.
Right.
But really, the thing about Adam Smith and why his legacy will always continue to be so complicated is because he gives us this idea of an economy which is something apart from the world of men.
Mm-hmm.
So the economy becomes a kind of god.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that continues
Absolutely.
to be the way in which so many, especially so many people in the Anglo-American tradition think of the economy in this way, as something apart. Oh, you can't mess with the economy because then it will destroy you,
Yes.
which is what they said about Brexit. And now it
Yes.
turns out it was completely untrue. Nothing happened. So a lot of it is just a kind of fetishization,
Mm-hmm.
and I hate to say this because here in Presidency College, which has such a rich history of economics, but it's perfectly clear now that this whole, I mean, economists don't know anything. I mean, they really know just about as much as looking at economics is like looking at tea leaves.
Yes.
Uh, you know, uh, and that's become perfectly clear.
Absolute
It, from
demonetization. Can
2008
I ask you
onwards.
about demonetization if you have any opinion about demonetization?
I'm not an economist, so I shouldn't have. But it does seem to me like a completely crazy thing.
Yes.
It's completely crazy. To me, it seems to belong to a realm. It has nothing to do with economics, in my view. I think it's a realm of a politics of gesture, which I talk about in the derangement
Yes.
also. It's a politics of gesture where you want to sort of, create. I think the words that were used in relation to it are very significant. I mean, one of the words used was Mahayagya.
Mm-hmm.
So it was thought of as a purification ritual. Actually, economics was secondary to it. And that's what makes you realize, how completely, I mean, it's functioning in some world other than, the world that we normally think about. And I think this is also what the critiques of it don't grasp, that, it's not thought of as an ordinary policy. It's thought of as some sort of, like people used to do those grand Ashwamedha Yagyas
Yes.
and so on. I mean, it's thought of on that scale,